I stood there in the scorching heat, watching my son's car disappear down the dusty highway. The plastic bag in my hand contained everything Matthew thought I deserved from a lifetime of sacrifice. A change of clothes, a water bottle, and 43 years of memories he no longer wanted. I wasn't worth the trunk space anymore. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. My name is John Ramirez, and I never thought I'd be telling this story. For most of my life, I was just a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a simple dream: to give my son a better life than I had. When my wife Maria died from cancer 12 years ago, that dream became my only purpose. Matthew was just 16 then, angry at the world and missing his mother. I became both parents overnight, learning to be strong when he needed shelter and soft when he needed comfort. I remember working 14-hour shifts at Rodriguez's auto shop, my back screaming in pain from an old injury, but never missing Matthew's basketball games. While other fathers wore pressed shirts and expensive watches, I showed up in my work clothes, sometimes still smelling of motor oil. I'd sit in the bleachers, trying to make myself smaller when the other parents would shift away slightly. But none of that mattered when Matthew would glance up at me after scoring, that brief moment of connection worth every sacrifice. College was our shared dream. No one in our family had ever gone, and Matthew was brilliant with numbers. I sold our small house and moved us into a one-bedroom apartment, sleeping on the couch for 3 years so I could save enough for his tuition. The night he got his acceptance letter to State University's business program, I cried for the first time since Maria died. "Dad, we did it," he said, his eyes shining with promise. "No, hee-ho," I corrected him. "You did it. I just moved some obstacles out of your way." The changes came gradually after he met Amanda during his junior year. She was from the kind of family that vacationed in Europe and had summer homes. The first time Matthew brought her to our apartment, I saw something shift in his eyes as he watched her take in our humble living room, the worn furniture, the family photos in dollar store frames. "Your dad's English is pretty good," she said afterward, not realizing I could hear her from the kitchen. "But don't you think he should try to learn more professional vocabulary if he's going to meet my parents?" Matthew didn't defend me. That was the first crack in our foundation, a hairline fracture that would eventually bring everything crashing down. After graduation, Matthew moved across town to work at Amanda's father's investment firm. Their visits became shorter, less frequent. When they announced their engagement, Amanda's mother asked if I'd mind not giving a speech at the reception. "It's just that some of Harold's business associates will be there," she explained with practiced sympathy. "We want everything to be appropriate." I nodded and smiled, swallowing my pride as I had so many times before. At the wedding, I sat at a back table with distant cousins who spoke no English, watching my son dance with his new in-laws, laughing at jokes I wasn't invited to understand. 2 years later, when Matthew called to say they were expecting a baby, I felt hope again. A grandchild might bridge the growing distance between us. I started working extra shifts to save for the baby, fixing up an old rocking chair I found at a yard sale, sanding and staining it during the long, quiet evenings in my apartment. The day everything changed started normally enough. Matthew called on a Saturday morning saying he needed to take me to see a specialist for my back problems in the neighboring town. "Amanda found someone really good," he said, his voice oddly flat. "We should go today before their schedule fills up." I was touched by their concern. My back had been getting worse, making it harder to work the long hours I needed to keep my small apartment. Maybe they were finally seeing me again, not as an embarrassment but as family. Matthew seemed nervous during the drive, talking too fast about nothing important, avoiding my eyes. When he pulled over on a stretch of empty highway, claiming he heard something strange in the engine, I didn't question it. Cars were my expertise. I was happy to help. "Can you check if there's something dragging underneath, Dad? I need to look in the trunk for my tools." I eased myself out, wincing at the familiar pain shooting down my leg. The sun was brutal overhead, no shade in sight on this forgotten stretch of asphalt. I bent down to look under the car, hearing the trunk open behind me. "I don't see anything wrong," I called out. Maybe it was just the slam of the trunk cut me off. When I straightened up, Matthew was already back behind the wheel, the engine starting. Our eyes met through the driver's window. His were filled with something I'd never seen before, not hatred or anger, but worse, nothing. I was nothing to him. "Matthew," my voice cracked, "what are you doing?" He placed a plastic bag on the ground beside the car. "There's water and some snacks," he said mechanically. "Someone will come along soon. This is better for everyone." "Better? Matthew, I'm your father. I can't keep doing this." His composure cracked. "Amanda's right. We need to focus on our future, our baby. We can't keep carrying the past with us." I was the past. 68 years of living, reduced to an inconvenient memory. "Son, please." But he was already rolling up the window, shifting into drive. The last thing he said was barely audible through the glass. "I'm sorry, Dad. It's just too hard having you in our lives." Then he was gone, dust kicking up behind his tires, leaving me standing on the shoulder with nothing but that plastic bag and the crushing weight of understanding. I had become disposable. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't curse his name to the empty sky. I simply sat down in the thin shade of a mile marker, feeling every one of my 68 years pressing down on my shoulders. 3 cars passed without stopping. I didn't blame them. An old Hispanic man sitting alone on the highway probably didn't look like someone who needed help, just someone who belonged nowhere. The 4th vehicle was a faded blue pickup truck that slowed, then pulled over. The driver rolled down his window, squinting against the sun. "John? John Ramirez?" The face was older, weathered by time, but I recognized him instantly. Charles Thompson. We'd grown up together in San Miguel, worked our first jobs together at Old Man Guzman's garage when we were teenagers. Before I left to chase better opportunities, before I met Maria, before I built a life that my son had just dismantled in seconds. "Charlie?" My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. He got out of the truck, taking in my situation with eyes that had seen enough of life to understand without explanation. "Need a ride somewhere?" he asked simply. I looked down the empty highway where Matthew's car had disappeared. "I don't know where I'm going anymore." Charlie nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "Then come home. San Miguel's still there, different, but the same in the ways that matter." Home. I hadn't thought of San Miguel as home in decades, but as Charlie helped me into his truck, I realized it was the only place left that might remember who I was before I became someone's unwanted burden. "What happened, John?" Charlie asked as we drove away from that desolate spot. I told him everything, the words spilling out like oil from a cracked engine. The years of sacrifice, Matthew's gradual distancing, Amanda's thinly veiled disdain, and finally, the abandonment on this forgotten stretch of road. Charlie listened without interruption, his weathered hands steady on the wheel. When I finished, he didn't offer empty sympathy or useless anger on my behalf. Instead, he said something that changed everything. "You know, I still have that old garage space on Cypress Street. Owner's been trying to rent it for years, but nobody wants a place that small anymore. Bet between the two of us, we could turn it into something. This town needs someone who knows how to fix the classics." It wasn't charity. It was partnership. It was dignity. San Miguel had changed in the 30 years since I'd left. The small border town had grown, with new businesses along Main Street and housing development spreading toward the hills. But Charlie's neighborhood remained much the same. Modest homes with well-kept yards, where people still sat on front porches in the evenings. Charlie's wife, Teresa, welcomed me without questions, setting up their spare room with fresh sheets and towels. That night, I slept better than I had in years, without the weight of trying to be good enough for people who had decided I never would be. The next morning, Charlie showed me the garage space, small and dusty, with an ancient hydraulic lift that groaned like an old man when tested. But the bones were good, the electricity worked. The wide bay door opened to a quiet side street where cars could easily pull in. "What do you think?" Charlie asked. "Still remember how to rebuild a carburetor?" I ran my hand along a workbench, feeling the familiar texture of metal and memories. I could do it blindfolded. We spent 2 weeks cleaning, repairing, and setting up. Charlie spread the word that San Miguel's prodigal son had returned, bringing with him 40 years of experience with classic cars. Our first customer was Father Reyes, whose 1965 Mustang had been sitting idle in the church parking lot for years. "No one around here knows how to make her run anymore," he explained, patting the faded hood affectionately. "These new mechanics, they just want to plug everything into computers." I spent 3 days on that Mustang, losing myself in the familiar ritual of diagnosis and repair. When the engine finally roared to life, Father Reyes clapped his hands like a child at Christmas. He paid us in cash and homemade tamales from his housekeeper. More customers followed. Word spread about the miracle worker with the classics at Thompson and Ramirez Auto Restoration. People came from neighboring towns with their beloved old vehicles, cars that had stories and souls. I worked with my hands again, finding purpose in fixing things that others had given up on. 1 month after my arrival, a local journalist named Elena Martinez showed up at the garage, curious about the buzz around our small business. "People say you can bring any engine back to life," she said, notebook in hand. "That's a rare skill these days." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Cars are honest. They only break down when something's wrong, and they always tell you what it is if you listen carefully enough." She asked about my background, how I'd learned my trade, what brought me back to San Miguel after so many years. I hesitated, unsure how much to share, but something in her earnest interest made me trust her. I told her everything. The decades of sacrifice, Matthew's success, and finally the abandonment on that lonely stretch of highway. Elena's article, titled "The Mechanic Who Was Left Behind," appeared online the following week. It wasn't sensationalized or pitying. It was honest. She wrote about second chances and the value of practical knowledge in a disposable world. She included photos of me working on a '57 Chevy, hands steady and sure despite my age. The story went viral, spreading far beyond our small town. Suddenly our phone was ringing constantly. People drove hundreds of miles to have their vintage cars restored by the abandoned mechanic, whose story had touched something in them. Some just came to shake my hand and share their own stories of family estrangement or late-life reinvention. 3 months after Matthew had left me on that highway, we had to hire 2 young apprentices to keep up with demand. I found I enjoyed teaching them, passing on knowledge that was becoming rare in our digital age. They called me Mr. R and listened with genuine interest to my stories about cars I'd fixed over the decades. Then, on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, a familiar car pulled up outside our garage. I was under a 1972 Ford when I heard Charlie's voice change, becoming suddenly formal. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for John Ramirez." Matthew's voice, uncertain and tense. I slid out from under the car slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. Matthew stood in the doorway, looking out of place in his expensive suit. Beside him, Amanda shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around the garage with poorly concealed disdain. "Dad." Matthew stepped forward, then stopped, seeing something in my expression that held him back. I nodded. "Matthew." "Amanda." An awkward silence filled the space between us, crowded with unspoken words and months of absence. "We saw the article," Matthew finally said. "Why didn't you call us? Let us know where you were." The question was so absurd I almost laughed. "You left me on the side of a highway. I assumed that meant you didn't want to know." Amanda stepped forward, her smile tight and practiced. "That was a terrible misunderstanding. Matthew was under so much stress with the baby coming. We've been worried sick about you." Her lie hung in the air, transparent and insulting. Behind them, I could see Elena arriving for our weekly lunch, stopping when she recognized who was visiting. "We've come to take you home," Matthew announced, as if conferring a great favor. "This place, it's not suitable for someone your age. You need proper care. Care? I set down my wrench carefully. Is that what you call what happened before? Dad, please. Matthew lowered his voice. People are talking. That article made us look terrible. Amanda's father's business is suffering. We need to fix this situation before it gets worse. And there it was, the truth, not concern for me, but for their reputation, their image, their comfort. I looked around the garage that had become my sanctuary, at Charlie, who had offered friendship when I needed it most, at Eleanor, whose honest storytelling had given me a voice, at my young apprentices, watching wide-eyed from the corner. I am home, I said quietly. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I belong. Don't be ridiculous, Amanda snapped, her polite mask slipping. You can't possibly want to spend your remaining years in this grease pit. I stepped closer to them, suddenly aware of my own strength, not physical, but something deeper. The strength of a man who has nothing left to lose. Let me explain something, I said, my voice steady. When you left me on that road, Matthew, you broke something that can't be fixed with apologies or second chances. But you also freed me. For years, I've been trying to be good enough for you, for your new life. I don't have to try anymore. Matthew's face flushed. Dad, you're being unreasonable. We made one mistake. No, I cut him off. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. A mistake is saying something hurtful in anger. What you did was a choice. You decided I wasn't worth keeping in your life. Now I'm making the same choice about you. Amanda grabbed Matthew's arm. This is absurd. Your father clearly isn't thinking clearly. Maybe we should talk about assisted living instead of having him stay with us. I actually smiled at that. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, and I don't need assistance to live my life. I need respect. I turned away from them, back to the Thunderbird I'd been restoring. Charlie will show you out. I have work to finish. This isn't over, Matthew called, as Charlie firmly guided them toward the door. You can't just... It was over the moment you drove away, I said without turning around. I just didn't know it yet. After they left, Elena approached cautiously. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? My son had abandoned me, then tried to reclaim me like a misplaced possession. I was living in my friend's spare room at 68, starting over when most men my age were ending their stories. I'm better than okay, I realized. I'm free. 6 months later, our little garage had become Thompson and Ramirez Classic Restoration, with a waiting list 3 months long. I'd moved into a small apartment above the garage, decorating it with photographs of the most interesting cars we'd restored. Elena and I had dinner together twice a week, our friendship slowly blooming into something deeper and unexpected. The most surprising development came when we started a youth program, teaching local teenagers basic automotive skills after school. Many came from struggling families, carrying the same hunger for knowledge I'd had at their age. Watching them master a new skill, seeing their pride when an engine roared to life under their care, it healed something in me I hadn't realized was broken. I never heard from Matthew again after that day. Sometimes I saw his name in business announcements or charity event photos in the newspapers Elena brought me. I felt neither bitterness nor longing when I saw those glimpses of his life continuing without me. Just a quiet acknowledgement that some roads diverge permanently. One evening, as I was closing up the garage, a teenage boy named Miguel, one of our most dedicated students, lingered behind. Mr. R., can I ask you something personal? I nodded, wiping grease from my hands. Do you ever regret it? All those years you spent helping your son, knowing how it turned out? The question deserved careful consideration. I looked around at what my life had become. The thriving business, the young people learning skills that would sustain them, the community that had embraced me, the unexpected joy of Elena's company. No, I said finally. I don't regret a single day I spent being a father. Those years taught me how to love unconditionally, how to sacrifice, how to find purpose beyond myself. Matthew may have rejected those lessons, but they made me who I am. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. My dad left when I was little. Sometimes I think it would have been worse if he'd stayed, but never really seen me, you know? Being seen is everything, I agreed. That's what we all want, in the end, to be valued for who we are, not what someone wishes we were. As Miguel left, I looked up at the stars appearing over San Miguel. The town I'd once abandoned had welcomed me home when I needed it most. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sometimes you have to be left behind to find where you truly belong. Life isn't about avoiding abandonment. It's about having the courage to begin again when it happens, to rebuild with whatever parts remain, creating something that might look different from what you planned, but runs just as true. Some people are like new cars, sleek and impressive, but designed to be replaced when a newer model comes along. Others are classics, gaining character and value with each passing year, worth restoring no matter how damaged they might seem. I choose to be a classic, and classics never truly die as long as someone remembers how to bring them back to life. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click on the box on the screen. Thank you so much for listening.